Thank you to BQE, the makers of BQE Core, for their support of this episode. BQE Core is the software that makes it easy to manage your projects and people for maximum productivity and ultimate profitability. Learn more at bqe.com.
All right, so you know that Isuzu that we were following on Cars and Bids?
Yeah, carsandbids.com, a vehicle auction site, and they had a, what was it, a 99?
So it was a 99 Isuzu Via Cross.
Which everybody, if you haven't seen a Via Cross, you need to look it up right now. It's one word, Vehicross. We'll put a link to it in the show notes, make it easy for you. But it's an odd duck. Corbin.
It's an odd duck. It is definitely an odd duck. And I was thinking about that, and you and I were kind of talking about like the unique styling. And unique is a special way. And I think even in Motor Trend had called it like the unique styling of the year.
Look at
and
me,
stuff.
Gen X styling.
Look at me, Gen X styling. Which
this is on their Wikipedia page. I'm just reading. Motor Trend reports it gets thumbs up for look at me, Gen X. Like, I didn't even know that was a category. That's pretty hilarious.
It is. I mean, and unique styling or look at me is potentially code word for, man, that's ugly.
Yeah, it is.
But
and
it was.
I usually attribute it to specific colors of automobiles, right? Which is, it's not look at me styling, but it's look at me because I bought the highlighter yellow Corvette.
Yeah.
That's how I see people driving around in those. I saw one of those, bright orange Ford, the new Ford Bronco last night. And it's definitely a look at me color, right?
Well, it's definitely a look at me, and it's interesting though, because let's be honest with you. The people that I see buying it are the look at me Gen Xers
right. They still have a mullet.
Who bought, wow, still have a mullet.
Yep. Never went out of style for some people.
But I mean, it was the same people who bought weirdly bought the Pontiac Aztek vehicle. But it was this, this interesting kind of like styling decision that was prevalent. Like, we were adventurous. We being, Gen Xers, we were adventurous. We were creative in our styling. It wasn't always a hit. A lot of times it was a miss.
Well, at least they tried.
But I was thinking about this when we were talking about this, and I was thinking about how, so now we have kids, and those kids are actually becoming grown-ups and starting to influence design or influencing like the style of their time period. And because we've noticed that a lot of things, what comes around goes around kind of, philosophy, they are picking up on, and this goes back to like what we were talking about with kids and music and the Gen Z. The Gen Z are our children, right? They're the age of our children. I mean, I have a 21-year-old, I have a 19-year-old, and there are other people who've got like 26-year-olds and 28-year-olds and however else, but they're all part of the Gen X crowd. And their design sensibilities.
They're millennials. They're not Gen Xers. They will take issue with what.
Well, but
don't forget millennials in between Gen Z and Gen X. They're the Gen Ys.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think millennials they're like up to like age 35, 40. Their 40 is probably like on the cusp.
Where's the cutoff?
Yeah, something like that.
Well, but I mean, anyway, so.
Sorry to disrail you. I just don't. I'm just saving you from getting the hate tweets.
Like I read them.
You're welcome.
I've noticed this, interestingly enough, that my Twitter engagement has plummeted so much over the course of the last year that I think I have to force myself like on a, I don't know. And this isn't probably good to like, admit this out loud that I don't really engage with social media anymore, unless it's pretty pictures on
it's
Instagram.
Better for you as far as like your mental health. So no
yeah,
judgment.
I mean, Well, I mean, I think my mental health in the past year of just working on this project that's, led.
Well, it's suffering in other ways. You've just found new ways to suffer. That's all.
Yeah. So anyway, back to the Via Cross.
Yes.
But if you think about it, like the styling uniqueness of, like, say, the Via Cross and the styling uniqueness of, say, the brand new Ford Bronco, you can see there's like this adventurous trend to like try something new and different. And it's not necessarily a looker, but it is unique and it is different and it is kind of adventurous and crazy. And I was thinking that, there's this interesting comparison to the designers of our, like, say, the car designers of our era that we're trying to cater to us as similarly youthed as, say, our children are. And so our design sensibilities, much like when we were talking about the music sensibilities, because I know that, like, I'm sitting there listening to my daughter's playlist, and my daughter's playlist is essentially the same playlist that I used to listen to when I was her age, or, well, maybe not her age, but later on in like my, early 20s and stuff, was the playlist that she's now listening to when she wears, like, Red Hot Chili Peppers shirt and somebody was name 3 songs.
You just bought that shirt at Hot Topic. You're not a real fan.
Yeah. and she literally can, she can name like the entire band. She can name who was in the band, who wasn't in the band, when they were, what album, had all of these things on it. I'm looking at her like, I don't even know any of this stuff.
The encyclopedia.
Exactly. I was like, I don't even know any of this stuff. But I think I'm getting to a point here of this point of like the design sensibilities of, like, back then are very similar to the design sensibilities now, whether it's in cars, whether it's in buildings and things like that. Think about, like, in architecture, we were trying to do adventurous things with deconstructivism and like this kind of like nouveau modern, kind of like trend that now there are, very similar, like, adventurous spirits in design now in both cars and in architecture that almost very hearken to this influence of the parents. I don't know if you agree with me, but I mean,
I'm trying to think of examples. That's all. I'm like, that's where my mind is racing to. And I don't cruise Arc Daily every day or anything like that, so I can't speak to the architecture side of that.
I can't talk about it because I'm going to give out spoilers and all of this other stuff. But anyway, I just recently went with my daughter to go and see Doctor Strange, and the new Doctor Strange that just came out on Friday. We saw it on the early release stuff on Thursday, so that we don't get hit with spoilers and everything else. And so so what was amazing about it is that as they're going through certain scenes and things like that, there was one scene that they had landed on, and it was this alternate universe. I think everybody, at least,
isn't that like the whole point of the movie? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody understands that, there's multiverses and they're going to go to an alternate universe and stuff. But the architecture of that alternate universe very much displays a lot of the aspirations of the adventurous architecture that we see in Arc Daily, the greenification of architecture, if that's now a word that I'm going to use.
Okay.
But I mean, it was just, it just really kind of like showed that there's like still this adventurous spirit. It's a unique spirit. Spirit. It is you look at it in the mainstream, and so, like, going back to the Via Cross, and the mainstream was just like, so that's what they think, the future of, the vehicles are going to be.
Not for mainstream consumption, right?
Not for But here's the funny thing about that. You look at that vehicle, and we were talking briefly pre-show about, other vehicles like the Pontiac Aztek that were honestly ahead of their time. They were ugly.
Not in their design, but in their ideas. Yeah.
In their ideas. And in the Via Cross, like, now that's all we have out there, right? We have these these sport utility vehicles that are
pill-shaped sport utility vehicles, right?
Pill-shaped sport utility vehicles that are really trying to, like, blur the boundaries between all of these different types of vehicles. It's like, it's the grocery getter, it's the soccer mom, it's the,
weekend warrior, the overlander. Yeah,
exactly. So it's kind of like an everything thing, and in a way you see that
one vehicle to rule them all.
And in a way you see that in the trends of some of, like, the more avant-garde architecture. You just think, okay, well, here we're trying to solve decarbonization. We are trying to solve this deforestation. We are trying to solve, all of the different things, the heat island effect, regenerative.
Carbon, right.
Yeah, exactly. Reduction in carbon, the reduction of discharge of CO2, and all these different things that they're trying to do. And so you see these, like, all wrapped up in this, like, very kind of like weird package of stuff where you look at it and you look at the building and you're like, huh, okay, that's where we're going. You're like, not sure I'm ready for that, but okay, like, let's strap in and see where it goes, kind of thing.
It's interesting because I think the way you're kind of talking about this is at the conceptual level. I think about concept car designs, and I think about how they are glimpses of technology from the future today. And, a real concept car is drivable and everything. And you can think about, like, I'm particularly envisioning some of the things I've seen from, like, Mercedes and BMW, where it's like the skin of the car modifies depending on the types of aerodynamics that are necessary. It's an all electric everything. And there's level 5 autonomous driving. So there's not even a steering wheel. So, like, what else happens when you're driving a car? And you start to think about the experience that people would be having. So it's not just about the design of the car. It's like, what about driving is interesting when you're not driving the car, right? And is it just about entertainment? Is it just about relaxation? Is it there's what's so interesting about driving a car is how you can do it and not even be thinking about it, right? Like, I think that's pretty interesting. Like, psychologically, you can sometimes drive to work and get to work and not know that you made any conscious decisions to get there, right? You were kind of on autopilot because you're thinking about other things. And so you start to extrapolate that to, well, what if you don't have to drive? And I think that these are the kinds of things that people who are working on autonomous driving, are working on car designs of, conceptual stuff for the future are thinking about. And then I think about buildings, and every single building that we design, futuristic or not, conceptual or not, is a prototype, right? It's very prototypical in that way. And what's interesting to think about is the buildings that you're talking about are kind of case studies of how buildings en masse should be. And yet, like, that to me seems practically impossible, right? Because we build buildings one at a time. We build, and I get it, like, the future of our planet has a lot more people on it, and the need for building is very high. But getting everybody on that same train to design and deliver buildings that have all of those, let's just call it bells and whistles for now, but very important bells and whistles, right? Like, it has to happen at scale. And so different from the car industry, where those ideas do trickle down and then those things do get produced in huge numbers, huge quantities, right? Like, thinking about just, I think Tesla's delivering millions of cars per year. I don't know if that number's right or not, but you see what I mean? Like, there's a lot of them, right? And they're all out there with however many cameras they have on those things, collecting information to inform the autonomous driving future that it seems imminent to me. And buildings, it's not like that at all, right? It's like there's one building that has all those technologies in it, and people who are designing buildings aren't all on the same page about what the future of buildings are. There's a lot of people who are, but again, like, the process takes so long, and it's just like these. To me, they seem very different, these two industries. I don't know where I was going with that. I just kind of, like, flow of the thoughts coming across my mind as you're talking about these ideas.
You know, the funny thing is that when you say that, when you talk about the ideas and then you talk about like the implementation and the delivery in the automotive industry, and you compare it to the architectural industry where we're, you know, like flooding all of these ideas into a building. And it's just a one-off building, and it's. I
mean, concept cars are kind of a one-off, right? Like we don't get to drive concept cars in the future. Like they just, all of those things never make it. So there is some analogy here.
So then, okay, so you had the concept cars, just like you had, you know, you've had concept houses, like think about like the Buckminster Fuller, the Dymaxion. Thank you. You know, house, which was supposed to be this prototype for future living. And though that particular house really didn't catch on, ideas of that house did catch on. And, you know, there were things that were implemented. But then you go back and you think about even further back, though, and you think about the effect of like the industrial age, especially specifically about like the production line and think like that. You think about the craftsman houses, and the craftsman houses weren't a style of house. They were delivered by Sears and Roebuck's, the craftsman series of homes that you basically could go out and you could buy a packaged home. They would deliver, you know, the plans or deliver the wood and everything else and all of that other stuff. And essentially you assemble these things on site. And so now fast forward to a similar concept where you have these concepts of like the factory built homes. I'm trying to find a better term than
or 3D printed homes even.
or 3D printed homes. Well, I'm more thinking about some of the homes that I had worked on in the past where these were custom factory built homes, but they were just a modification of a housing type or a housing delivery type. It wasn't a change in the way that you lived. It was just the way that you bought it, the way that you built it, the way that you put it out on site and stuff like that. We're always talking about ways of like, you know, doing the carbon reduction and all of these other things. And, you know, look at, and now I'm going off on a different tangent here, but you know, you look at the way that you can do that and implement that through, you know, more production built homes in production built buildings. But then you also wonder, it's just like, really, is that good for, you know, the environment? Because here we're trying to like reduce carbon, but we're still building, you know, houses. What about all of the stock that's already out there?
I know there's you think about the cities that do exist and the need to retrofit those to fit the new models and the new thinking is huge. And the owners don't have the money to do that necessarily. I mean, look at our own selves, right? And what we can do at our own houses. It's one thing to call for action and do all that stuff, but it's another thing to follow through with it and get everybody on board. So that kind of mass mindset shift is the most difficult part.
Yeah, exactly. Because everybody wants new. They want, you know, the latest, the greatest, and all of that other stuff. I mean, that's why we go through cars a dime a dozen. I mean, how many cars have you owned throughout your lifetime? And how many cars have I owned throughout my lifetime?
Talk about it.
Exactly. You know, and you just think about it, it's just like, oh,
right.
I've been contributing to this issue, and it's this issue of like, if they were built to last, then why are we constantly keep buying, you know, new, you know, it's just like, well, you know.
Right.
So anyway, I'm not sure if
because capitalism. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if us, you know, starting this conversation off about the unique qualities of an Isuzu Via-Cross were going to lead us to this direction, but
but here we are. That people might be wondering, what the heck is a Pontiac Aztek? I'm sure there's some part of the audience who's never seen one. It's one of the ugliest cars ever actually put into production. I would venture there's a lot of ugly cars in production, but this is one of the most.
I believe that it's in the top 10 of ugliest vehicles.
And just what made it popular again was Breaking Bad. That's what Walter White drove.
So it was in Breaking Bad, and yes, I still contend though that as ugly as the vehicle was, there was a uniqueness to it. It
was ahead of its time.
It was ahead of its time because, you know, if you think about it now, you know, it was this vehicle that came out and it was just like, you know, you're going to be able to live, you know, again, like the Via-Cross or like, you know,
hashtag van life.
You'll be able to like
Aztek.
it was van life before van life existed.
Yeah,
I mean,
Aztek
before it was very popular, and
life.
and so it came with a tent, and you could take it camping with you, and
So what Cormac means when he says it came with a tent was, okay, so this was a sport utility vehicle. There was a rear hatch and a tailgate, so kind of like split horizontally in the middle. The tailgate folded down, the hatch folded up, and there was a tent that it was like a half a tent, and it plugged into, you built it off the back of the car to create shelter when those two pieces were open. And then you would sleep inside the car with like half car, half tent surrounding you. So it's not like the car came with a tent and you've set up the tent on the ground. No, like the rear half of the car became the tent. It was pretty interesting. And they shipped this, like this was a real thing.
oh yeah.
I'll put a link I'll find a photo of that and put it in the show notes.
I just found one. It's like why the Pontiac Aztek was one of the worst American cars ever made. And
yet ahead of its time.
But yet was ahead of its time. I mean, I'm reading now, like, Pontiac created the biggest failure in automotive history. I'm like, really? I mean, we did have the...
well, there's lessons to be learned from failure, for sure.
Exactly. I mean, but, there's like other failures like Edsel and all of these other things. But
people have short memories too, just so you know.
They do. But again, though, it was just one of these things that styling wise, it was hideous. Sure. I mean,
that was an early clickbait headline. That's what that sounds like to me.
Yeah. But I mean, it was just weirdly one of those things that, and weirdly enough now, it has this kind of like cult following.
Does it?
Oh yeah.
I don't see them. I can't tell you the last time I saw one on the road.
I can, and it was probably about 3 weeks ago.
Well, yeah, maybe more so on the East Coast.
And I will also say that it was in Michigan, and I have noticed now that I've been going back and forth to Michigan, like house hunting and things like that, that you see a lot more of cars. You're like, wow, I didn't even realize that those were still on the road.
And is that like a Michigan thing, you think, it's because of the origin of the vehicles?
I think so. I think, and the fact that just they're able to like they've got access to keeping the things alive and running and driving. This is the best way of thinking about recycling, is the fact that you're able to keep this a car-ish type thing alive and running on the road. Sustainability. There you go. I mean, come on now.
Sustainability of the fossil fuel vehicles. Yeah, it's a delicate subject. Let's take a quick break to share more about our sponsors. Systems and standard operating procedures. You already know that's how to build a profitable business and find the freedom you want. You need systems and procedures. But you struggle with choosing the systems you need most and how to implement those systems quickly so you can get back to doing what you love most. The Designing Your Business Masterclass series was created by an acclaimed architect and business consultant, Douglas Teager, FAIA, to help fellow architects and engineers run their firms more profitably while maintaining a healthy work-life balance. Douglas grew from a solo practitioner to become managing partner of his 30-plus person firm, and then later sold his firm so he can do what he does today, helping architects be more successful at Teager Consulting. On the third Wednesday of every month, Douglas dives deep into an essential topic that will strengthen the profitability of your firm and make it sustainable for growth in the years to come. Register now for the Designing Your Business Masterclass with Douglas Teager at bqe.com/masterclass and start implementing powerful systems for the profitability you need and the freedom you want. Every live masterclass session includes AIA continuing education credit, and when you visit bqe.com/masterclass, you'll have access to the full library of past sessions on demand. The Designing Your Business Masterclass is free, and it's brought to you by our friends at BQE, the makers of BQE Core, the software that makes it easy to manage your projects and people for maximum productivity and ultimate profitability. Register now for the next Designing Your Business Masterclass at bqe.com/masterclass. That's bqe.com/masterclass. And now let's get back to our conversation. Okay, so let's switch topics. You and I have been going down this kind of on our own paths, down this kind of nostalgic. There's so many cool things from our past. Maybe this is the link of the episode, is it like things from our past? But I watched the Bones Brigade documentary, which is, if anybody who doesn't know about the Bones Brigade, this is definitely dating me, and it's the skateboarding team from the 80s and 90s. And I mean, these people are still skateboarding today. This is Tony Hawk, Steve Caballero, Lance Mountain, Rodney Mullen, Mike McGill. Yeah, these are all the names, Tony Guerrero, and all led by Stacy Peralta, who kind of put this team together. And I was just, I was watching this, and I was texting you and some other friends of mine, friends of the show, who we all grew up at the same time. We're all Gen Xers, and we were all into skateboarding to some degree and at various levels of success with that or failure. And then, lots of shin diggers and not very cool tricks. And then another documentary that I haven't watched yet, but you have, and you wanted to kind of talk about some of the ideas in this, I think, is the Tony Hawk documentary that came out on HBO maybe this year. I'm not sure the date.
It literally just dropped just like a week ago. Okay.
So brand new Tony Hawk documentary specific to him, but I'm sure it includes other members of the Peralta skateboarding team.
It was specific to him. It did really it had a lot of the Bones Brigade, talking about it, because you really can't talk about Tony Hawk without, talking about the Bones Brigade, because that's context. Where he came from. These were the people who, starting with Stacy Peralta, who gave him his shot to kind of like hit the big stage. And then once he was kind of, and not giving too much away from this, but if you guys know the history of Tony Hawk, I mean, he was just this little short kid, this little small kid, really young.
Gangly.
Yeah. I mean, they called him weak, and he innovated because he was smaller. He was not as strong, and he wasn't as strong of a skater as a lot of like the Bones Brigade and other skaters that they were competing against at the time. And so he innovated by overcoming his deficiencies. And then, as he started to get bigger, he actually became the tallest member of the Bones Brigade, and then just got, bigger and stronger and everything else that, now we know the story that, he is now like one
obviously the most successful skateboarders ever. Yeah.
I mean, definitely. So when you think about skateboarding, everybody, thinks about Tony Hawk as that person. And so
do you want to talk about that? I'm interested to hear where you want to go with this, because this is not going to be a review of the documentary, right? Like, that's not the idea here.
No. So what I wanted to kind of like talk about isn't necessarily about the documentaries, although I will suggest anybody who's even remotely interested in skateboarding, or in a way where I'm going to be going with this, is there was a constant theme with every single one of these documentaries. So, you had reached out and you said, hey, have you seen, I was just, watching the Bones Brigade documentary. And then, of course, I went on and I watched it.
It's on YouTube for free.
Yeah. And then I fell down this rabbit hole of watching a bunch of other ones, and it was almost like rekindling memories of my past. And it was, just amazing to kind of like start thinking about, not just thinking about, because of course, when you do that, and you have these documentaries about these people who were basically our contemporaries in, they're our age, they grew up in, we read about them in like Thrasher or Skateboarder and all these other things and stuff. And so, you're familiar with them, but they're also linked to your past, with the music and everything else and stuff like that.
Culture.
Yeah. The culture, like the dress, you're just like, wow, did we really dress like that? And all of these other things. But the one thing that was kind of a constant in all of these was that whatever you think about like skateboarding as like a bunch of like miscreants or, rebels or counterculture, anti-culture, whatever you want to call them, the thing that stood out the most to me on all of these guys, specifically Tony Hawk and Rodney Mullen, are the dedication to the craft that they brought, because they tried and failed and tried and succeeded, so many different times, and just dedicated their life to the craft, dedicated their life to becoming the best, innovating. I mean, almost every trick that you can think of in both street skating and in vert skating came from either Tony Hawk or from Rodney Mullen, or the cross population of each of them doing tricks. They were really good friends and both on the Bones Brigade. And, I was thinking about, like, here's people who are spending like 8-10 hours a day on a board, either like, flipping up in the air on a vert ramp, or like just like slamming themselves up against like walls, or falling in, on concrete curbs, trying to do like kick flips and all of this other stuff, and just doing all of these different things. But they innovated their niche in society, their craft, their, like, what they make money off of. They innovated by constantly practicing, constantly changing, constantly evolving. And I was thinking about that as how do we do that in architecture? I mean, what do we do to
I'm laughing because this is, to me, it's leading to the SciArc Base Camp video.
In a way, it's
because I know you're not going that direction.
I was not going that direction, but I'm now thinking to myself, they like eat, slept, and breathed skateboarding.
Yeah, but it became dogma, right? For the architects, not the skateboarders. I definitely don't get that vibe from the skateboarders at all.
I don't get
just
that,
to be
because
clear.
Yeah, because here's the thing though, is that this was a way to feel like they belonged. This was a way, like when I hung out with, all of my buddies in the 80s and stuff like this, we were all the outcasts of our neighborhood or whatever else. I mean, we didn't really belong. I mean, we sort of like fit in, when we tried to like, we went out and played baseball, or, I was like big into like Little League baseball and all of this other stuff, but I never really felt like I belonged. And so like, the crowd of like, just like oddballs was more my crowd. And so it was more of just a way of, it was like a big social club really than anything else. Whereas in architecture, it's more of a job, but in a way, we do, there are things about architecture that define us, in our life. And I was just wondering though, is like, how do we do, how do we like, develop our craft? And I know that we've talked a lot about, sometimes we don't, we basically kind of like copy and paste and keep repeating things over and over again, and just sort of like incrementally evolve. You say it all the time, far better than I do, that things that architects hate is change and
the way things are.
Right. And so, we stagnate ourselves. And I was just wondering, it's like, we've let ourselves go down this path where we don't innovate. And so going back to the conversation that we were talking about with the cars and the innovations of, cars and all of that other stuff, is like, how do we get to the point where we're not sacrificing our life to, just develop architecture, but how do we like really try to, get our architecture to a point where it's really reflecting innovation. It's really reflecting forward thinking more than it is just, kind of just like sitting still. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be stylistic. And I think you, especially in your other podcast, Troxel, where you're talking to tech innovators in the field of, design and construction. And so it's sort of dawned on me that what we're not taking advantage of when we start to innovate the tech side of things, innovate the, let's just say, the documentation or that part of the process, that we're not taking advantage of. Okay, now we've relieved ourselves of a lot of things that we would normally otherwise have to do and spend countless hundreds of hours on, like code research or egress, related things, or documentation of things that, when we're, or modeling and all of these other things. And so looking at all of that as a process of being able to kind of like, almost free ourselves up from a lot of what we call the drudgery of kind of like a project isn't necessarily, I don't know if we're capitalizing on the opportunities it's affording us for the design and innovation part.
Hmm.
Am I wrong in that kind of like thinking?
Well, man, there's just so many things flying through my head right now because I think about how, you're pointing at a particularly small group of innovators in skateboarding. And I wasn't one of those for sure. And I think we have the same thing in architecture, right? There's a small group looking at the total population of architects. And so you start thinking about how many capital A architects are out there, thinking about the ones who, like, for example, right, we've talked about on this show, Billy Chen, Todd Williams, right? Talked about Thomas Pfeiffer, is that right? Glenstone Museum. There are examples, and that is again a small population, and there's this spectrum, right? There's this spectrum of talent / innovation versus, and I say versus, I don't know that versus is the right word, but then there's the business side of the business, right? And there's people are incentivized by different things. People care about different things. I was just talking to a friend of mine yesterday who's a designer in a firm, and there was a design review, and he was talking about how there were some projects that were presented, and it's just like, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut because they're that bad. And it's and it's like, I imagine this is lots of firms. Like, it's not just one firm, right? It's design is not a culture at so many firms. Innovation is not a culture at so many firms. And so I think it is hard to see examples of those things in everyday life unless you specifically are looking for them. And we tend to see them done by the same kind of people over and over again, because that's the culture and the life that they live by, which is very different. Like, I was listening to an interview recently with Rick Rubin, who's a music producer, and he was talking about how he goes to every single project with is open a mind. He says a completely open mind. Like, I don't know how that's possible, right? But for him, I have to take him at his word. And he says, like, I'm not there to influence it in any particular way. I want to find out whatever is the best way for us to make this art right now. I'm not interested in doing it the way that I've done it before. I'm not interested in forcing any kind of methodology onto the artists themselves. Like, we are there to, he didn't say the word collaborate, but like, it's like you're bringing the different ingredients to make the best outcome possible. And what's interesting about that is, like, I feel like there are parallels to the architectural design process with that. And yet we have to stop at some point, right? And you don't even just get to stop once it's done. You have to, like, be done even before maybe even that design process is figured out.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that example is kind of going back to what I was saying about all of the things that facilitate us to get the end product done. Ruben's bringing his kind of like his expertise of producing, mixing, editing and all of that other stuff with, his staff to it, so that he can let the creatives create. And so they don't have to think about all of the other stuff that goes into, like, producing and putting out the artwork.
Stuff that they don't have expertise in. Right.
Exactly. He's allowing them to just create, just, be the artist that they feel like they are or feel like they could be. And he's facilitating them on that creative process and taking all of the other stuff out of the way so that they can just worry about this stuff.
And potentially push them to a place that they've never been before. It's about capturing that kind of raw spirit, emotion, soul in a moment, and then it's just then it's there, then it's done, right? Then you move on. It's captured.
Exactly.
And that to me is, I mean, there is a parallel to architecture there, right? Like there are people who specialize in these different things. And I think a lot of times, though, it's like somebody else wants to tell me how to do it. A project manager who understands let's just say the schedule or the budget or whatever, wants to tell me how to design. And so and then you start to get into these, what I'm talking about, where it's like, it's kind of a mess because it is such a team sport.
Yeah. We get in our own way because we still have the belief that everybody's a designer and that everybody should have a say and input on this. It's just like, I want you to feel a part of this. And in a way, yeah, we obviously want to have, that. It
sounded so crass right there because I think about the Frank Gehry where he's just holding up the middle finger, right? Don't tell me how to do it, right?
And the thing though is that I've met so many people who they're like, well, like that's your niche in the business, and I don't want to, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. And so you say, okay, well then you develop that. You become strong at that, whether it's project management, scheduling, adhering to budgets, constructability, putting together document sets and stuff. If that's like your thing and that you don't really want to get into like the design side of things, then help facilitate the design, help facilitate the innovation.
I totally agree with that. I mean, like, because I do have kind of divergent views at the same time of expertise versus generalization. Like I see value in both. And that's very much how I'm wired. Like I like to get good enough at a lot of things to understand the language of them all so that I can start to connect the dots between them. But I also see the value. So I'm very much a generalist myself, but I see the value and expertise in somebody being able to live in the zone of their thing and add that value right when it's needed on everything they touch. And not even to say that necessarily happens on a schedule. Like, so that's where things get a little weird with creativity, right? Is because it doesn't happen, like Rick Rubin says, it doesn't happen on the quarterly basis, right? And so when you think about how everybody can play their part, like, okay, so the best example I have of what you just said is a friend of mine, Alvin Huang. He's been on my other podcast and he's lectured in my class at Cal Poly in the past. And he's an architect. He teaches at USC and he does a lot of conceptual design work. He's definitely on the capital A architecture side of things. And he has a quote from a structural engineer that he worked with. And it was like, the architects I want to work with are the ones who bring me the most interesting ideas. And they're not interested in just solving the same problems all the time. Like there's other people on staff for that, right? Because that's what they're really good at. And so you start to think about this as a puzzle and how the pieces work in concert together and aren't competing or telling the other one how to do their thing. Of course, they should be talking about facilitating a process that is cohesive and smooth, right? It's not, you don't want to disrupt all the other pieces because then the puzzle just blows up. But when you think about the other members of the team and the value they can bring, like if you're talking about a technical architect solving like waterproofing problems on a facade, like they want to solve interesting waterproofing problems. I would hope that they would. That's the kind of senior project architect I want to work with, is somebody who's like, sweet challenge, man, let's do this, right? Rather than rolling their eyes, oh my God, they did this thing. Oh, I'm so sick of this kind of, And so we see all of that, right? We see all of that in the profession. And I think it is interesting to see how many people are just kind of suffering through it because they just want to do the same thing rote every day. And like, actually, that's what automation and robots are going to be for, is that kind of stuff. Like we want the people who are interested in solving interesting problems all the time, because that's where the value of architecture lies for society.
Well, but see, that's the big lie that education sometimes tells, which is, as a generalist, you should and could and probably need to do it all. You should do it all. So that
we're all trained to be self-sufficient, as we said on yeah, you need to do all of the pieces of the puzzle.
And it's not to say that people who are generalists that do it all. I mean, we've got tons of massively talented generalists friends that do great work, but they do. And here's where I start to alienate myself and people and everyone else, is that they do bite-sized projects that they can actually really kind of control everything, and it's a little bit more palatable to them. It's more manageable.
Well, and because they have to, they can't afford to hire all the staff. Yeah, I mean, I totally get it.
So whereas the projects, let's just say the project that I'm working on right now, it's 8 massive buildings, it's in a foreign country. It's everything. I can't do everything on that project. I mean,
no matter how much somebody else wants you to,
there's not exactly not enough hours in the world for, being able to do that and everything else, and it just doesn't make sense. And so to then start to say, okay, now my role is more compartmentalized. So here I am, as a facilitator, as the project, as a project manager, facilitating other people to be able to do their job and make sure that everything is kind of in a line, and make sure that, we can get the project done, it's properly staffed, all of this other stuff. Right. And so that's sort of so I realized the role that I have isn't ooh, you're going to be designing. Ooh, you're going to be detailing. Ooh, you're going to be doing this. No, no, I won't. And so
you actually have the agency to say that. Many
right.
people do not.
But, and so when you're able to, that's where I guess where I was going is being able to kind of recognize facilitators to be able to innovate.
Well, this is the job of a leader, right? Is to put together the best team for the thing at hand, and enabling every one of those parts of, this machine or this team to do their thing, to be the best that they can be doing it in the time that they have to do it.
But again, though, that also helps with it helps with architecture being able to innovate more. And that's the one thing that we've been very lax in being able to do, is because we basically kind of okay, here's we can evolve this, or we can evolve that, or, hey, this is, I've done this 100 times. I know that it's right there and all this other stuff. So we leave some of the innovation part behind. So then,
and don't confuse innovation for how it looks or feels, or,
exactly.
It's the whole process, and it's all the pieces of the process.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
And yeah, thank you for making that distinction, because I don't mean innovation on aesthetics. I mean innovation. I mean, we could have the same kind of aesthetics as a turn of the century, 19th to 20th century,
because
type
that
thing.
Could be the most appropriate
exactly
for the project.
But being able to use, cutting edge materials that help reduce your carbon footprint and all of these other things. These are the type of innovations. It's people are going to have their stylistic opinions about everything. And if you take that part out of the conversation of innovation and really look at okay, how do we, evolve architecture in the built environment? Or let's just say, how do we evolve the built environment? Let's take architecture out of this, because again, it's one of those subjective terminology things. But so anyway, so I think where I'm going with this. I don't know if I'm being clear enough on this kind of drive or desire to help alleviate the, let's just call it the drudgery of things, to really focus on innovation and evolving us. Because I mean, that's the thing that kind of struck me with all of these, is they weren't reinventing the wheel. Some people were reinventing the wheels when, as these skateboarders were, they were innovating the products, they were innovating the styles, they were innovating the appearance of skateboarding. Now, suburban families are buying their kids skateboards and pads and all this other stuff and sending them off to the skate park and all of this other stuff. That was not the case when we were growing up. The appearance of skateboarding back in the late 80s or late 70s, early mid 80s and all of that other stuff, when we were out cruising the streets and stuff, is where we were just, a bunch of hoodlums. And now it's mainstream.
It's interesting to think about it from you said earlier, copy paste and things like that. I'm just thinking of innovation in skateboarding was copy paste, right? It was like, it was doing what humans do best. It was taking something someone else did and building upon it. A lot of times seeing somebody do something would unlock that it was even possible. And then all of a sudden, lots of people could do it. And then there would be one other person who would then take that and do something else with it. Like the one, I can't remember the guy's name, the one guy invents the ollie on a half pipe. And then Rodney Mullen adapts it to the street and everything changes. But Rodney Mullen did not invent the ollie. He copied and pasted and innovated slightly to make this whole new language for street skateboarding. And what's interesting is we copy and paste and we automate and we try to save time and do all these things in architecture too. And there are innovations that happen, but I think what's different here, just off the cuff, this is just an ongoing conversation. So it's not like this is a thesis for some doctoral thing, right? I don't have it all prepared out like you. You said, I hope you can see where I'm going with this. This is how the conversation works, right? Like we're vetting it as we go, and hopefully we'll get feedback. I'm just thinking like skateboarding was on display. Skateboarding was in the magazines. Like we have magazines, we have architectural magazines of the final product. We don't have magazines of the process. And so skateboarding with a bunch of friends is like the process in real time, just like working on a project with a team is the process in real time. How do we convey the innovations, no matter how small they are, no matter what piece of the puzzle they're attributed to, so that the whole industry becomes mainstream in the future, to your skateboarding analogy a minute ago, right? Which is back then it was done like this, and it was like, it wasn't mainstream. It was counterculture. It was punk rock, right? It was for a small segment, and now it's everywhere. It's like architecture is like that to me, and we can't get out of our own way, because if we innovate on a process, on a piece of the puzzle in our own firm, we tend to keep it there and not share it and not put it on display. There are definitely people who do that, and I think they're mostly on the technology side of the practice, and they are very engaged on social media and on YouTube, and they are sharing these things. Those things are out there, but they're not mainstream, like adopted and elevating the whole profession together. It's super piecemeal. So I don't know how we do that. I mean, that to me is like kind of why we do this, what we do, right? Which is to expose this kind of thinking, expose these kind of ideas, expose interesting ways in which people are doing that and talking about it. But overall, that it's not a culture that our industry has. So it is kind of interesting to look at another model and the success. And was that success guaranteed? No way, right? It was never guaranteed. Skateboarding has died multiple deaths along the way, and somehow reemerged and gotten even stronger to the point at which now it's this global industry. Probably makes more money than architecture, right? Thinking of it that way is kind of interesting and scary and sad. But thinking about how they've done that, and because there were people like Tony Hawk who are willing to just continue to take the beating. I mean, there's architects like that too. And what we do matters for society. It is, and with the need for whatever the number is, it's like we got to build a city the size of New York every year for the next 33 years, or every 3 months. It's like insane, right? That the amount of built environment that needs to be produced by 2050 is like, it's incredible. And how are we going to do that when we can't even like move together? You know, it's I can't even believe buildings get built.
Although I will say this, that, you know, one of the things that looking at the first, I don't know, 2 minutes of, or 5 minutes of the Tony Hawk documentary, it's basically showing him in his warehouse on his ramp, and every single trick ended in him on his ass. And the thing is that he kept getting back up and trying it again and trying something different and trying that. Just like, you know, when he like hit the 900, you know, I mean, it took him 10 years. It took him 10 years to do that. But wait. True.
Getting up. And then it was like way over time for best trick contest. I watched that live. It was insane. It was like the cameras are not going to shut off until, because and everybody around him's like, he got up again. He's still going to try. Like he didn't stop. Yeah. So
cool. Here, but here's I think where I was originally going with that I probably didn't make the connection with until we had this conversation. So is that the way that they just throw themselves out there, commit to an idea. I mean, we start off our designs with, committed to this initial idea, and then we try it and we try it and we try it and we try it. And it may not be successful on all of the different iterations throughout concept design, that then when we finally hit it, we're like, yeah, we just hit our 900 on this. And so then they just, continue to evolve it. And then we, continue to evolve it. And so there is this kind of like parallel to like the commitment of something, and it really is just this, trying to like keep testing it until it works. Keep testing it until you can finally land it. And we do that often, and we do that like on every project. And if we don't do that, then that's usually when the project is, kind of deemed a Pontiac Aztek of architecture.
That's what this podcast is about. Like you were just saying how you didn't even know where you're going until we had to, these are the kinds of conversations that need to be, and this episode is a perfect example of a bunch of failures to a pretty good landing at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's leave it at that. Until next time.
Thank you to BQE, the makers of BQE Core, for their support of this podcast episode. Visit bqe.com/masterclass to register for the next Designing Your Business Masterclass. Thanks for listening. This show is part of the Gable Media Podcast Network. See all the shows at gablemedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. You can help support what we're doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and don't forget to share it with your friends. We'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at archispeakpodcast.com, where you can find our entire catalog of shows. Talk to you soon.